Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. presents the world premiere of the Frederick Douglass musical American Prophet, now through August 28th. I spoke to Marcus Hummon, who co-wrote the book and wrote all of the songs after a Nashville career, writing hits like One of These Days for Tim McGraw, Cowboy Take Me Away for the Chicks, and the Grammy-winning Bless the Broken Road for Rascal Flatts. Hey, Marcus Hummon, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are talking to you. I mean, I'm all excited because I know all the huge country hits you've written, from Bless the Broken Road on and on and on. We can get onto that maybe at the end of the interview. But first, we got to talk about the real reason we're talking, because you wrote the music along with a bunch of other talented folks for American Prophet, the Frederick Douglass musical that is at Arena Stage now through August 28th. Now, we interviewed the star, the gentleman that plays Frederick Douglass, a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to follow back up and sort of see how it's going and take sort of a music angle. So I guess first, tell me how you got involved with the project. Did Arena Stage reach out to you, or how did you get tapped to do it?
Sure. Well, I'm actually the co-book writer, and I actually started 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago now, by myself with a project which was kind of a song cycle, but I used some of Douglas's language from his first of three autobiographies, and but it wasn't really wildly ambitious, but it was beautiful in its own way. A lot of choral music, and I started to read the other two biographies, and I realized how extraordinary Douglas's life was, even beyond that first book narrative. And the fact that, that he had been friends with John Brown, and he had this really interesting relationship with Lincoln. Yeah. And then I wanted to really make a big American musical. And so I wanted to have a co-writer on the book, and I wanted to have a great director. And so I had some theater contacts in New York, so I've done a lot of theater on the side, much to the chagrin of my country publishers, by the way. And
do it all.
That's like the worst thing you can do. What, you're doing theater? No. And anyway, I found that there was this guy, Charles Randolph Wright, and everybody said, no, he's the guy. He is absolutely the guy.
Yeah,
but
he did Motown the musical, right? Motown the musical.
Motown, but he also had he had sort of street cred in terms of his politics, his cultural vision. There are just a lot of aspects about him, and everyone was like, really. But they were all also saying, he may not want to work with you. He's just not going to just like anybody, And anyway, he did finally. I kept sending him materials, and he didn't even listen to them. But then he finally came to Nashville. I think he told me because he was actually there to see family, and we put together a little, couple of scenes and a speech or two from Frederick, and about 4 songs. And at the end of it, he just said, play that first song again, and it was the only song that remains from the original.
Which one is it?
It's called, the opening piece is called "What Does Freedom Look Like," which has also was subsequently recorded by Jennifer Warnes, she has a very interesting version. But that's the only thing that exists from, that and a couple scenes are there. Everything else, once Charles got involved, he was like, let's get to work. And so that was for me the beginning of a lot of exploration, both as a script writer, but as a composer, because I knew or at least I felt I knew what the show should sound like, but the songs, in a sense, really in essence, had to be written, because there was a little bit of a body to work from, but nothing. It really happened. Things got rolling, and they got rolling fast. Right. And Charles and I, Charles is not just an extraordinary artist, director, and collaborator, a script writer. He is just an extraordinary human being. And that also was what I needed. I really needed someone that I could, I felt a sense of, mutual empathy and vision. For example, we early on decided that we wanted to not just explore Douglas's sort of ascendancy during this period up to the age of 47 in 1865. I wanted to end the show with the death of Lincoln and with the end of the Civil War, partly because we did not want to do a full biopic. and because he had another 30 some years of really interesting things to do with his life. But that first 47 years, that's really the stuff. I think that's where the fire, pardon the reference, but that's where the fire really kind of is. And he was all about that. And also he was all about the idea of that if possible, if we could use Douglas's language in the show, it would give people a sense of what an extraordinary writer and orator he was. And it would take a while, but and some real due diligence. We had scenes from autobiographies, scenes with John Brown, scenes with Lincoln. But we would have to find pieces of journalism and pieces of speeches and his many writings to try to flesh out conversations. I mean, obviously, it's when you see the show, it's not all, when he's speaking, it's not all Douglas, but we think it's about 85%. Yeah. And that gives it a sound that one of my sons, one of our sons, we have 3 sons, and one of them is a singer-songwriter performer, Levi, and doing real well. But he came down twice. He flew back in a second time, and he said, one of the things he said to me, he goes, why are we so dumb now? How is it that people spoke like that? And I was like, well, people didn't speak like that necessarily. Douglas spoke like that.
The most eloquent, elevated among us might have at Lincoln Douglas, but not everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that Charles and I both really set out to do was that we really wanted to talk about his wife. And
right, that's what he was telling me, that you really, Cornelius Smith Jr. was the guy's name. He said that you really elevate the story of Douglas's wife, and she never really got her due, Anna Douglas, before this, but this show really elevates her. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, honestly, she's been kind of denigrated historically, and really for no good reason at all. I mean, because she's a woman, because she's Black, because she's older than him, because people said that she was illiterate, which, by the way, her family her daughter ended up writing a book in her defense, which in and of itself is significant. Why do you have to write a book in the defense of your mother?
Right.
After she's been married to your dad for 45 years, they have 5 kids, 21 grandchildren. Why are you writing a defense? Well, the reason is because she needed a defense. And the reality is that this is a woman who basically masterminded Douglas's escape from slavery, and therefore was probably already a soldier in the Underground Railroad. We know for a fact that she ran the railroad through their Rochester home. She took care of all the money. He was on the road, pretty much constantly during the 1840s and 50s. And she did the lion's share of raising the kids, and clearly was a significant backbone in the story of Douglas. That there's one of the songs that we have. If she's without Anna, I just don't think there's a Frederick Douglass as we understand him today. So we really wanted, and also remember too, like we're always thinking of Douglas. I'm sure Cornelius pointed this out. I think so. I saw that interview that he pointed out that when we think of Douglas, we often think of him as the Lion of Anacostia.
Yeah.
As the elder statesman, and we're looking at a young man that he probably we think he met Anna at about the age of 18. She would have been 23.
And it was Baltimore-ish, right? Because he was a slave in Maryland, and she was a seamstress, sewed in a sailor's attire to help escape. Like it's an incredible story, the Anna and him together.
Yeah, and it's so dangerous too. Like there's a piece in it where I kind of developed a musical piece called Children of the Same River. And, it turns out that, he was owned by Colonel Edward Lloyd and then ultimately the Aud family. And it's kind of complicated, but basically by one of the wealthiest men on the Eastern Seaboard. But he lived right there in Talbot County. So that's the same basic area that not only Anna, but Harriet Tubman is from. It's like there's something in the water there,
Exactly.
Yeah. So they really were, as the song says, they really were children of the same rivers flowing into the Chesapeake, basically, and then out to sea. So
that's why it's so cool you're doing it in this area. It's like a big full circle moment.
Oh, listen, when I found out Arena wanted to do it, like I was so excited, because even though I've been in Nashville for 36 years and then and kind of grew up bouncing around. My dad was a State Department guy, so we were overseas a lot. But I mean, I'm a DC kid. I mean, I was born in GW Hospital.
You were born where? GW?
GW, you know, and I remember, I think one of the first things, I think I saw Man of La Mancha when I was a little boy at Arena. And, you know, I know about DC's theater community. It's one of the great theater towns really in the world.
Yeah, and Arena is right at the top of that class.
And to think that we, you know, and with Molly Smith and that, and, you know, that we would get to do it right a stone's throw from where Douglas lived and finally passed away. Anyway, yeah, it's been extraordinary. I mean, I can't wait. I'm going back for the last few shows, and it was hard to walk away from it, you know, but I do have, I guess, a life.
Well, tell me, I'm really interested too, is I know that, like, for instance, like when Lin-Manuel Miranda's writing Hamilton, he's diving into Ron Chernow's Alexander Hamilton biography, and then the ideas are percolating to write these songs. And forgive me if that's a comparison too many people make, but I'm going somewhere with this. I want to know, when you start diving into Douglas's 3 biographies. I guess we had the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. We had
Slavery,
my bondage and my freedom,
then
Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. Right. Yeah. I will never, at the University of Maryland College undergrad, never forget reading that for the first time. And, you know, like you, I grew up in country music up in the cornfields of Maryland, and, you know, a country fan. Country music's changed a lot, of course, but I feel like people that grew up sort of where we didn't really even you heard of Frederick Douglass, we didn't read this. So reading those words, it's life-changing. So tell me about when you encountered his actual words and when the musical ideas started going, or were they at separate times? Like, did you read it earlier? I guess probably.
Well, I mean, again, the genesis of the piece that you see now, I mean, yes, early on, as I say, 7 or 8 years ago, I do a fair amount of writing theater, you know, and a little bit of opera and some choral work. And so the Episcopal Cathedral in Nashville had come to me for a choral piece the year before. This is many years ago. And they liked the piece I did. And they came back and they said, we'd like you to create something based on your understanding of the prophetic. And I thought they probably wanted me to write about Jeremiah or Isaiah or whatever, but I happened to be, I'd been at a bookstore and I saw the narrative just sitting there. And I remembered from college, you know, reading some Frederick Douglass, but I never really dug in deep, you know, but there was that something was there, some special thing that needed to be fed. And I picked up the book and I was, you know, blown away. And so I happened to be reading it right at that time. And I told the dean of the cathedral, I said, would you mind if I did an American prophet? And he was like, okay, sure. And so that's what began with as I say, a much more modest endeavor. But even there, what I immediately realized that Douglas has given us actual language, not only his own, but he was quoting, you know, the overseer, you know, who's calling out Demby, you know, out of the Tuckahoe Creek, and he gave us language for a variety of things. And so once I got working with Charles, the premise, the thought was, well, if this is a guy who wrote 3 autobiographies, and the third one he edited as a second edition, this is someone who wants to tell his story.
Yeah,
this is someone who really believes that his story is something very, very important for us to learn as Americans, just as people. And so we should probably endeavor to let him tell it. You know, there are times in the process of writing the script and the score with Charles, you know, working with Charles, where we'd have dramaturgs and sometimes people would have, you know, certain types of criticisms. And my premise was always like, well, it's fine you want a critical eye looking at things, but you better come to it from a Frederick Douglass perspective, not a you perspective. I mean, I'm not telling you my version of the story. we're not telling you Charles's version. So we wanted to tell Frederick, we want to let Frederick say it. And so consequently, for example, the autobiography that I personally used the most was actually Life and Times. Okay. Because in Life and Times, he really delves into, well, it covers the mid, from the mid, I was saying Bondage, I think ends in like, I think it's published 1855. I can't remember.
Yep,
But
1855. That was the second
yeah,
one. Yep, it was
that's the second one.
1845, 1855, and then the last one you're talking about.
And then 81 and 92,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yep.
So
you nailed it. You nailed that was exactly
good,
on.
good.
Yeah, I have it up in front, and you got it up in your brain.
Well, I tell you what, I better know it.
Yeah, I bet if anyone, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but in that one, you're reading along, and then here he is. He's coming into contact with John Brown, who himself is such a fascinating character in American history and prophetic in his own way. And then there was, and listening to those conversations as I'm reading and thinking about what he's saying, and that's, that, and then you're moving along, and then he's terribly critical of Lincoln, and Lincoln, of course, nobody's been written about more than Lincoln. But here he is having this critical perspective, but then they're meeting, and then the meeting is so extraordinary. And then the transitions of Lincoln's racial conceptions just before he dies. And, obviously part of the premise of our show is that, the 13th Amendment and, these perspectives are affected by Douglas. And anyway, I don't want to say for people, there are people who might not have seen it. I want you to go see the show, but we make I think a strong case for why Douglas, he gets for many things, but why Douglas deserved more credit for the end of slavery, at least the legal end of slavery in America.
Oh, I agree entirely. And those meetings at the White House with Lincoln, and I believe he was the first African American to actually ever be invited into the White House. I think
that's correct. They make the point that he was the first African American to advise a sitting president, and he ends up doing it really twice. And then he has a third meeting, which is at the second inaugural. And he was also about to have a tea. He was invited to tea with Lincoln and Mary Todd. And he couldn't go because he had a speech that day. He regretted it the rest of his life.
Because he would never get assassinate.
No, because that would be it. That would be it. And we'll never know, too. Like, I wonder often if Lincoln had lived, whether or not Douglas would have seen more of a role in the actual cabinet of a second administration. I mean, we'll never know.
I think you're dead on. I think he would have, because I mean, we could play that game all day, because the failure of Reconstruction in the next 100 years of Jim Crow and et cetera, it sets off a ripple effect, because we don't have Lincoln anymore. We have Johnson, who, it was a Southern sympathizer, and it becomes a whole thing. But yeah, I think you're right. I think Douglas and Lincoln were so tight that I think that, everything would have been a lot different.
I'll tell you a funny thing about, because of course Johnson really, hated Douglas, and they had a famous face-to-face that didn't go well. And but the funny thing is that when I tried to romance Charles Randolph Wright to work on this project with me,
the wooing process.
we met where he came in to hear a few songs and a couple scenes was the Andrew Johnson Theater in Nashville, Tennessee.
Joe, it's kismet, man.
Yeah, that's how that is. But and as far as the music, the music, a lot of times things just sort of, the music kind of comes to you through the characters. And also I have a director, who, like there's this one section where Douglas, a little boy, and he's been passed around within this family, goes to Baltimore, and then of course famously he's sent there to basically be a manservant or slave to an 8-year-old boy that is, anyway. But he's the woman there doesn't know about this sort of judicial or jurisprudence around the enslaved, and so she decides that he's obviously really bright, and she wants to. So Sophia Aud started to teach him the Bible, and that comes to us from all 3 autobiographies. So out of that comes this rant from her husband about how a slave is illegal and you'll ruin them and he won't understand anyway, and so forth. And from that, the 8-year-old realizes it, because again, Douglas is a genius. And so even as a little boy, he suddenly realizes how the whole thing is structured.
Yeah.
And that it's structured around, keeping people ignorant, keeping people uneducated, not giving them the keys to freedom.
And he has great, it still is. There's different tools. There's cable news. There's social media, but it still is.
Hey, listen, it may not be that long before we won't be able to tell the Frederick Douglass story. So all you're going to have is a musical.
I'm with you. It's scary, but yeah.
But I'll give you an example. So there, he has this phrase. He goes, "Very well thought I. Now, if knowledge unfits a child to be a slave, to wit, one mystery resolved." He understands that, and to me, that was clearly music, because so much of his language is music. So I started to work. I'd had a piece actually called "Very Well Thought I," but it was a choral, up tempo, kind of a weird, fun, but it was more of an oratorio piece. And here's an example of having a great collaborator. Is that I was just kind of willing to let it go, because we needed tempo, and we need, a show got to have a lot of different kinds of rhythms,
Yeah.
And Charles goes, "Marcus," he goes, "we have got to have, this is not a moment for everyone. I mean, it is in a broad sense, but this is a really special moment for a little boy who's been traumatized, and you have to take us inside. You've got to bring us way inside." So that's also what the process is like. It's also about not just me looking at things, characters, the moments, but it's having a great collaborator who says, "Give me a different kind of piece of music." And then so now there is a beautiful, I think really, of course, Cornelius sings it so well. And there's an arpeggiated guitar piece. Most of the show's written on piano, but and it's very lyric, and it's very, you can really, I think you can really feel. And Cornelius Sell, by the way, I just want to say, we have a great cast in general. I mean, but I just want to say Cornelius is just like, he just wears me out, and so does Crystal. And every time I watch the show, every time I'm moved by them, by their instincts as actors, how Cornelius has embodied this really complex character. And, of course, we'll never know. I mean, history, this is our attempt at letting, as I said, Fred tell it. But man, it just works for me. And he seems like there's sort of a controlled anger at times in him, and then he breaks, and he must have been fun too, because they were in love and they're young.
Yeah.
But then it's dangerous, and he's out there, and it's amazing he lived through the 1850s. I can't believe he wasn't assassinated.
Yeah.
Anyway, no. I'm bad about Douglas. I'm so nerdy about the stuff that once I get talking, it's just like blah blah blah.
Oh, you won't find a more willing participant for the nerding out about Frederick Douglass and history and alternate history and what could have been. And I'm game. Let's go.
Well, I can tell you've done your reading, and like, you must know this stuff. Have you read David Blight's book? Have you tried?
No,
that
I have
one?
Not. What recommended? I'm dying. What is it?
Well, it won the Pulitzer 2-3 years ago, and it's most people, I guess, people consider that sort of the main biography. Although there are some things about it that, I mean, in the Douglass world, like, there are a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions, but Dave, I can't remember. It has the term American prophet in it, but I can't remember the name of it. But David Blight, and it's and he won the Pulitzer Prize, I believe, 3 years ago for it.
Oh, that might be my summer reading.
That's pretty definitive, I think. I mean, it's close to 700, and I think it's 750 pages, because Charles Isherwood referenced that book the other day in his Wall Street Journal review. By the way, that was exciting. I mean, Peter Marks, getting the likes of Peter Marks and Charles Isherwood to review the show and then to survive it.
watched him post stamp of approval. Yeah.
Well, that's the most, to me, was like having Peter. That honestly, maybe it's because I'm actually a DC guy.
Yeah.
That actually, I have to say, that was pretty extraordinary. I mean, I really felt. I felt the entire cast and everyone were kind of blessed by that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned you're a DC person, born and raised, and then moved to Nashville, but I want to know a little bit more about your story. So what took you to Nashville?
Well, there's just music, you know. I mean, I was like I said, I was born in DC, but my dad was foreign service, worked primarily for AID. And then we bounced around West Africa, East Africa, Philippines, Saudi Arabia. They eventually continued on in Botswana for many years, but I went to college up in New England. And then in the midst of all that, I was studying political science, but decided I was spending more time in the music rooms and playing clubs with guitar. And then I taught myself piano, and I got the bug, and the bug while I was in college for writing music and playing, different instruments. And it never left. I mean, I'm 61 now, and it still obsesses me. And so I moved initially to LA, which is its own long, weird trip story, and then drove cross country to Nashville when somebody heard me in LA and said, you got to go to Nashville. And I got there in '86, and I never left. I fell in love with this town, the largest songwriting community in the world, and nobody's close per capita, right? Oh, yeah. But it's also the ethos, the whole culture is around songwriting and about the ability to actually sing, play instruments, to write songs, to be lyrical. And spent years trying to get record deals, did get record deals, but that really kind of didn't work out. There was no Americana. I was probably not country enough. But interestingly, people started recording my songs, and so I had a career that I didn't expect to have. And so I kind of shifted gears and just wrote songs and wrote with groups, and then did independent records. And then I just started writing plays. I mean, I had a friend that, said, you should try it. You write story songs anyway. And I was like, well, I actually grew up with parents that were huge theater people, really, and and in DC, they were the Kennedy Center and Arena and Signature, and they were, but I mean, I heard as much theater music actually growing up as I heard anything. And so once I started to make that move, then again, it was like getting a virus again, That's probably the wrong metaphor to use these days.
Yeah, nowadays.
Yeah, I'm going to try something else.
You got bit by the bug.
That's worse. That's worse.
Yeah, nowadays. Yeah. now we're talking locusts. Come on.
Let's say just an obsession, and if that obsession continues. But from a guy who's fundamentally a songwriter, when you move into theater, a lot of the bones of the process are in songs to me. And those are my favorite theater writers too. The writers that that when you left, you were really moved deeply by songs. And, hopefully you can even maybe remember them and take them with you, or come back and revisit that. So that's kind of been my thing. It's just, I've kept my hand, and I still write with artists today. I still sit with the artists and do my actual job. I write for a company. But on the side, I go out and I tour as a singer-songwriter, and just to keep my hand in that. That's a big part of my life. But then I write theater, and I had an opera in January called Favorite Son, which was about Episcopal High School.
Nice.
Well, it was about a running back. I was a running back for Bullis.
No way.
Yeah,
well, I was a linebacker, so we'd be going at it.
Hey, where'd you play?
Oh, it's in Frederick County, Maryland. Linganore High School. Coach Connor, who's he's gone to a million state championships in a row. But
wow, yeah, I played for Bullis. When we moved back to the United States from Saudi Arabia. My parents were living in Potomac, and so Bullis was just down the street. Oh, yeah. And I was a ball player, and I kind of looked at a couple different schools, and actually, tried out as a basketball player first. But I don't, wanted to play. I'd been away from the U.S. for 5 years, but my senior year I played. Junior and senior year I played basketball for Bullis, and then we actually won, or were co-champions of the IAC my senior year.
Were you guys what was your back? Was it like a power eye or like a wing tee or a?
Yeah, it was a wing. It was, what is the one that what do they call it now? It's sort of archaic at this point. I think Delaware uses it. The double wing. And actually the other running back was I think he was all Met, and he was Stevie Mertz, and Steve Mertz went on to play for Towson for Division I.
Wow.
And I think he was the 100-meter champion. I know that he was fast as lightning. And then I was the other back and played the other side, but also was kind of a slot receiver as well. I went on in college. I played for Williams College, and at Williams, I played slot back.
All 4 years? Did you play all
4 years? All 4 years. I have 2 fake hips to show for it.
I played a year at King's College and then transferred, but I'm proud. See, man, this is what I love about you. You're the Renaissance man. People say, oh, the meathead jocks can't appreciate theater, and theater people don't like country music, who don't know African American history. No, learn it all, be it all, and you're a walking example of it.
Oh, well, yeah, we got to have fun in every direction.
Exactly. No boxes to put people in. Thank you so much for joining us, and telling us a little bit of your DC backstory and football tangents and all the rest. But I do want to, let's, if we got time, let's do a quick. We can do it rapid fire style. I'll throw out some of the amazing hit country songs you wrote, and you can just give me a quick tidbit on them or something.
Okay.
So obviously, most famously, you co-wrote "Bless the Broken Road" for Nitty Gritty Dirt Band originally, like in the early '90s. Fishing in the Dark fame. But then you won a Grammy for it when Rascal Flatts famously covered it. 12 years later in 2006. Right. So tell me about putting together that one and just that whole journey from Nitty Gritty to Rascal's version.
Oh well, the Dirt Band version was I actually sang. The first hit I ever had was a song called "Only Love for Winona." That was my first #1. And I was friends with a woman, Matrace Burke, who's also a Hall of Fame songwriter. She wrote "Strawberry Wine" and "Wild Angels" and lots of stuff. Anyway, she was getting married to Jeff Hanna of the Dirt Band. And of course, I was a huge Dirt Band fan. My wife's a minister. She presided over the wedding. I sang the song "Only Love." And then Jeff, I hadn't really met Jeff. And he said when they got back from the honeymoon, I was going to get to write with him. And of course, I really wanted to have a Dirt Band cut because I was a huge Dirt Band fan. And even the Dirt Band sound was like the closest thing I had to country music. And that was the world I was living in. So it was significant on a lot of levels. And I was just trying to come up with an idea and happened to meet with a guy who told me, it was at the time not writer. He subsequently became a writer. Or he may have been a writer at the time, I don't know, but he was working in our publishing company and was just having drinks. We're at a bar, and he was telling me about his divorce. And this is all very public stuff. We've told this story many times, but in something that he said that night over drinks, just kind of hit sort of a light bulb in me about how love is and how one door closes, another one opens. And I got home to the piano and started working on "Bless the Broken Road." And then when Jeff got back from his honeymoon, I played him what I had and told him about Bobby's sort of insights about life and love. And so Jeff and I actually did the actual writing of it, and we took a couple of days actually, which, believe it or not, is usually these things come in kind of 4-hour increments, but we thought we had something special. So we spent a little more time and then, the song was cut by the Dirt Band. They did not use a piano motif. Jeff and Jimmy, they didn't sing it. Rob sang it, and it was great. But we thought that was it, and I thought, well, job done. There it was. That's 27 years ago, and then the actual first piano version with that part, this part here,
he's gonna play it in his studio, folks. Here we go.
Yeah. So. Right. Mostly the part that people might know. So the first time that ever happened was actually my record on Columbia, and Jeff sang background. Actually, so did Matresa on that. But of course, nothing really happened with that. And they never put that song out as a single. And then it got cut a few more times. It was even singled by a woman by the name of Melody Crittenden, and it went into the 40s. And we thought that was it, because usually you get some exposure for a song, and that's it. And but it literally, as it has been said before, it sounds cliched, but it had its own broken road. It just kept, there are people that cut it and didn't put it out that I could list, and eventually I was writing with the Rascal Flatts guys and had written a few songs for their first couple of records with them. And they used to always say, you know, God, we love that Bless the Broken Road song.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, yeah, well, why don't you cut it? Don't just tell me you like it.
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't cut it. They didn't cut it on the first record, and they didn't cut it on the second, and they didn't cut it on the third record either. But the first single they put out went out, and it didn't feel like it went high enough because they were the biggest band at that time.
Oh yeah.
And it went to like 12, you know, which for them was like a dismal failure.
Do you remember what it was? Do you remember which song?
It was you know, It'll Come to Me. I remember it was written by an English songwriter. And I remember it was a wonderful song. Maybe It'll Come to Me as we're talking. Sure. But they went back into the studio and they just decided they didn't feel like they had a single, even though they had this great record. Oh, it was called Feels Like Today. Feels Like Today. Yeah, man. Hey, by the way, we must have a lot in common. You play football. You're into history.
We could talk all day.
And you're a history geek.
Definitely. History geek, music geek, theater, everything.
I love it. Yeah. So they went back in and they cut one more song. And they did, Bless the Broken Road. And I remember when I first heard, I was getting back from out of the country and I got back to my publisher and they said, they were like, they actually cut the song. And I was like, what do you, Bless the Broken Road? And then I heard it, and it was one of those times where you don't actually always love something that people record of yours.
Sure.
You say you do,
yeah,
but you don't actually. And when I heard that recording, I was just like, man, that's like waiting on a fastball. It's just like those guys, right? They just killed it. And Gary sang so beautifully, and they didn't overproduce it. It's like you can hear all the parts to this day. It just is one of those recordings that it was sort of a magic recording, I think.
Oh yeah, and it was the final perfect destination for all those broken road stops. Every long lost dream of someone else putting it out led you to where they were at that moment.
Right.
And now every wedding you ever go to still plays it. It's amazing.
Well, I do it. I think I began to realize even before it was a hit. Once it got out in the world, and again, part of it is having a minister for a wife.
Sure.
But I mean, I did countless weddings, countless. I mean, people would say, guess what? This is going to be our song. I'm like, well, it's kind of a lot of people's song.
A lot of people. I apologize. We actually slow danced to Garth Brooks' "Shameless." I'm sorry, but
I don't.
Yours would have been good
I don't blame you.
All right, awesome. Well, I know you got to run, and so it's good we did a deep dive on that because that's the big Grammy winner, whatever. But I know you need to run, so I'm gonna rapid fire from here on out. All right, you can just whatever comes to your mind. But
okay.
The Chicks, Cowboy Take Me Away. Oh, and Ready to Run, I guess. But both of those with the Chicks.
Yeah, so the Chicks were on their way into Sony Records when Sony was dropping me. And so that was like a really hard time. One of the songs off my record that they didn't play was called One of These Days. And that became a #1 for Tim McGraw.
Tim McGraw. Wait, that's One of These Days You're Gonna Love Me.
You're Gonna Love Me. And that was my second #1. And that kind of had kept me from utter depression when I got dropped. And the other thing that kept me from it is they set me up with the group out of Austin. They just signed the Chicks. And I kind of knew who they were because I have family in Texas. But they'd gotten this new singer who's an Austin gal, but had gone to Berkeley on a vocal scholarship, Natalie Maines. And they changed their sound. They'd been kind of a Riders in the Sky kind of group prior and more, I don't know. But once they got her, I listened to what they were doing and it was like, man, this is right down my alley. Because roots country is my favorite. Like that's my jam. And so we wrote.
What do you mean, like Red Dirt or Root? What do you mean?
Well, Red Dirt, but then add a Jimmy Webb twist, add a twist of harmonic significance. Like, I mean, to this day, I just want to write Wichita Lineman, or.
Is that Glenn Campbell? Yeah.
But that's Jimmy Webb, the writer, and like his piano playing too, like the ability in country and roots music to have great chordals. Like, and if you move over to folk rock, then you're into James Taylor and Joni and Cat and Paul and that world. The merging of those worlds is my favorite thing. And just as a singer songwriter, not necessarily, because once you get into theater, then there are some other colors that come in, that I'm interested in. But yeah, with the Chicks, the funny thing for me was the story I always tell is first time I wrote with Marty, the fiddling sister, we actually wrote Ready to Run, which is sort of a Celtic thing, which meets a blues thing. And I didn't know what it was. I loved it. I thought they'll never cut that. But that eventually was the first single. It was nominated for 2 Grammys for a single of the year, I guess, or by a band or whatever. And it won that. But Song of the Year, which is the one which would have been mine and hers, it did not win. But but that was a great. I just didn't know. I didn't know that they would become the biggest, one of the biggest bands in the world. And
they're amazing artists.
They're as good as I've ever seen, for me, for my money. And then the second time that I wrote with them, by then they'd sold, like 7 million records. And so it wasn't a secret anymore. And we ended up writing my little story. I'll give a very, very short version. It's just that by then I had to write with them. I had to drive out of town and I had to go to a gated community and there were like guards and, so I got to write and I knew that I only had till 3:00 and that somebody else was coming to write and they had X amount of time. And we wrote this song and it just wasn't very good, called Marianne. I don't know why I know the title even, but we only had an hour left and she was like heating up some SpaghettiOs or whatever for me. And she told me she had a title that she wanted to write for her sister's wedding. And of course, I was like, oh my God, I could get inside the family. I'll be tight with the, there's millions of records. I've got to figure this out. Yeah. So I told her to tell me the title. We'll write it, we write it right now. That kind of thing. And she goes, well,
over SpaghettiOs.
She's like, I saved this title for you. And this, I've told this story a lot, but she said, or what I heard her say was, Calgon, take me away. And I was like, oh no. I said, so this is really, because for me, I'm old enough for like, that's a commercial. That's that's a girl's leg hanging out of a tub. Yeah. And I was like, well, are we going to do a parody? Is this like going to be a funny bit? Yeah. Like Love Comes Clean or what? And at the wedding. And she goes, and I remember her just looking at me like, and then she goes, no. She's not Calgon, cowboy. Emily is marrying Charlie's a cowboy. He actually breaks horses. He has like a ranch in San Antonio. Yeah. And that song is the fastest song I've ever written with anyone. And it was weird because I was like, well, let's write it. And I had in my book of lyrics, I had like a little quatrain, a little 4-line sequence. And she started playing on the mandolin to sing da 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 da. And I was like, I want to touch the earth. I want to break it in my hands. I want to grow something wild, unruly. And she's like, I want to sleep on the hard ground. And we practically spoke it to each other.
Wow.
We were done. We had it on a cassette back in the days of cassettes. And we recorded it. I did a demo of it. They were on the road, of course, being incredibly famous. I sent it to them and heard nothing. And eventually they did Ready to Run and they asked me to play the acoustic guitar on it. So I played the guitar and nobody said anything about any other song we'd written. Yeah. And I eventually got a phone call from, and they said that Sony had finally paid them money, because that was the big deal early on, not politics, but money. and that she finally had got this kind of lousy car, and she finally bought a really fancy car. Would I like to come see it at the studio? And I was like, yes, I would. So I went to the studio and they said, well, go sit. The girls, the 3 women had me come. It was a beautiful BMW. And, as you could imagine. And then they said, no, you sit in the passenger seat. And Natalie said to you, would you like to hear the sound system? And I was like, of course I would. And then I said, well, push the button. And I did. And there was the record of Cowboy Take Me Away, which to this day, again, along with Bless the Broken Road and maybe a couple others, Ready to Run 2 is one of the most beautiful pieces of music that I've been involved with, that I've ever heard recorded. And it just, wow. The outro is worth the price of admission. It's amazing. So
when she sat you in that car and hit play, did you say, it sounds so good to me?
Yes, it sounds
so good. Yeah, he followed up. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I expected they would play. I think I remember thinking that they'd play Ready to Run, because I could hear that on the speaker. But sure. And then it was ba, 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 ba.
Even better. It might be there. I mean, wide open spaces. There's so many, but that might be right up there with their best stuff. That's great. Well, I know you need to run, and you and we're terrible at rapid fire because we love this stuff so much. You can tell, but hey, Born to Fly, the cheap seats. One of these days. I mean, there's so many. We could be here all day, but we really really appreciate you taking the time, and it's yeah, I love Renaissance man. You're into everything.
Well, let's do some time when I'm in DC. Let's grab a guitar and let's play some music sometime. If I don't know if your listeners like that kind of acoustic stuff, so the little room thing or whatever.
Oh yeah, the tiny desk. My boss Joel Oxley was just talking about trying to maybe do some stuff like that. That'd be awesome. So you're from around here, so you probably get back up here a good bit, even after American Prophet's done, right? You probably get back up.
Hey, listen, if you want to do that, I'll get on a plane. I just hope American Prophet keeps going so that we have more things that we can talk about theater and that hopefully, I know there are conversations out there, and of course the reviews have been great, so that gives us a leg up to some degree, but there's no sure thing, but I really do hope. I think that Washington D.C. has offered so many great pieces of theater, and I'm hoping that this is the next one.
Oh, I'm all about it. So thanks for doing this. And yes, we'll arrange it. We can get you in studio playing or anywhere. Yeah, let's make it happen.
I'll bring my banjo.
Bring the banjo. My wife has a banjolele around here. I can't play worth a lick, but I'll be geeking out with you.
I love banjo. Yeah.
Great. It's awesome. Hey,
all right, thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. This was awesome.
You bet. All right. Take care.
We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.